Coming up today, South Korea marks a key anniversary in its transition from military rule to modern-day democracy. We take a look back at the May 18th democratic movement. The White House says North Korea will be on the agenda at next week's G7 summit in Japan. The US stresses Pyongyang's international isolation will continue if it refuses to change its path. Plus, more bloodshed in Baghdad. At least 70 people have been killed and more than 100 others injured in 3 ISIS-claimed bomb attacks in the Iraqi capital. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Wednesday, the 18th of May. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this afternoon, a national ceremony to mark the 36th anniversary of the May 18th democratic movement was held this morning at a national cemetery in Korea's southwestern city of Gwangju. Prime Minister Hwang Kyo-ahn was the highest-ranking government official at the event. He was joined by the leaders of Korea's 3 main political parties. At the ceremony, Prime Minister Hwang said the May 18th democratic movement marked a watershed in Korea's democracy that paved the way for a more free and just society. The families of the democratic movement victims and some 3,000 students were also in attendance at the ceremony. A choir performed the signature song, March for the Beloved, and participants were free to sing along if the spirit moved them. So today marks the 36th anniversary of the May 18th pro-democracy movement, a day as important now for Korea as it was more than 3.5 decades ago. The movement laid the groundwork for the democracy South Koreans enjoy today. For more on what unfolded on this day in 1980 in the city of Gwangju, our Shinsegae reports.
It's a day remembered nationwide. For some, it evokes bitter memories. For others, honor. Marking the pro-democracy movement that took place on this day 36 years ago, most people are reflecting and reminiscing on the historic event that altered the political and social landscape of Korea. In 1980, public opposition to martial law led student activists in Gwangju to carry out a string of demonstrations, which triggered a clash with the military forces deployed by the authoritarian Chun Doo-hwan regime. This pro-democracy movement took root, making Gwangju the symbolic center for civic action, and now May 18th is widely remembered as the day that gave birth to democracy in a struggling nation.
It was worth the sacrifice. But to think that my friends and brothers are laid here, it's hard every time I come.
Visitors share one voice on this day, designated as a national day of commemoration in 1997 to sustain Korea's democracy and help move it in the right direction to ensure these sacrifices were not in vain. Here at the Bangwol-dong Memorial Cemetery, where the martyrs of the Gwangju pro-democracy movement are laid to rest, visitors create a stone tower to honor the spirits of those who have given their lives for the democracy of the nation. The building of the tower was once stalled for more than 2 decades, but resumed with public support and continues to take shape. And now, not only does it represent community, but also the united struggle and the spirit of democracy that Korea continues to benefit from today. With every stone added, the contributions of those who gave their lives are remembered, and the spirit of the movement is carried on to build a better nation. Shinsegae, Arirang News, Gwangju.
North Korea will be one of the topics of discussion at the Group of 7 summit in Japan next week. The White House also says Pyongyang will continue to face its current isolation if it doesn't forgo nuclear development. Park Jong-hong reports.
North Korea's provocations will be high on the agenda at the upcoming G7 summit, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest says the U.S. is confident the issue will be addressed since the regime's destabilizing activities are a common cause of concern. In a press briefing, he added that Washington will continue to work with the international community to isolate the North until they make clear that they're prepared to denuclearize the Korean peninsula and stop engaging in provocative acts. He reiterated that it will be the same kind of isolation the regime currently faces. In addition, he said the U.S. is leading the way in international efforts to pressure the North to comply with its global obligations, and that is why the toughest sanctions yet were adopted by the UN Security Council earlier this year. U.S. President Barack Obama and other G7 leaders will convene for a two-day summit from May 26 in the Japanese city of Iseshima. Park Jong-hong, Arirang News.
Now, picture Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un in the same room thrashing out their differences. It might be difficult to imagine now, but it might happen if the presumptive Republican presidential nominee wins the White House in the fall. In an interview with Reuters, Trump expressed a willingness to talk with Kim if it helped to get the regime to denuclearize. Trump said, quote, "I would speak to him. I would have no problem speaking to him," end quote. Now, this is a different tone from his previous remarks about the North Korean leader when he called Kim a maniac and a madman. Trump refused to elaborate on specific North Korea policies, but said he would pressure China to help find a way to deal with the regime. South Korea's number 2 shipper, Hyundai Merchant Marine, is in last-ditch negotiations with foreign ship owners to negotiate a reduction in its charter fees in an attempt to stave off bankruptcy. The company is looking for a 30% reduction and may even offer equity in exchange. Kwon Jang-ho reports.
It's a negotiation that can make or break the future of Korea's second-largest shipping company. Hyundai Merchant Marine is meeting with 5 unnamed foreign ship owners in Seoul on Wednesday to ask for a reduction in charter rates as it tries to dig itself out of a mounting debt crisis. Hyundai recorded a loss of over $200 million last year alone, and in a deal made with its creditors last month, it promised it would renegotiate its charter fees with its foreign ship owners in order to stave off bankruptcy. Hyundai has a total of 116 ships, 83 of which have been leased from foreign ship owners at a cost of $830 million. That means a 28% reduction in charter rates, which the Korean shipper will be asking for, would cover most of its losses. It would generally be considered good business for the ship owners to accept the reduction as well, as in the current low trade climate worldwide, ships are in lower demand and there is a risk they will not be rechartered somewhere else. But Hyundai could try to sweeten the deal as well by offering a debt-for-equity swap. If negotiations fall through, though, then Hyundai will need to file for court receivership. The charter rate negotiation was one of 2 key promises Hyundai made to its creditors last month, the other being another negotiation to convince its bondholders to convert part of their bonds to equity. A bondholder meeting is expected later this month. A tentative deadline for the charter rate negotiation is set for Friday, and Hyundai is hoping to at least come out of it with a verbal agreement. Kwon Jang-ho, Arirang News.
Now, Korea's biggest tech giants increased their R&D investment in the first 3 months of this year in an apparent move to foster new growth engines amid the global economic slowdown. According to Samsung's quarterly report, the company spent more than $3.2 billion on research over the cited period. Its ratio of R&D investment to sales stood at 7.7%. That's up 0.3 percentage points from a year earlier. Samsung recently revealed the industry's first 10-nanometer level DRAM chips. LG Electronics also upped its research costs to over $860.5 million compared with $857.6 million a year ago. LG had earlier announced that it would tap deeper into the vehicle components business. Facing slower demand, Korea's major export industries have been losing steam, which is why the government is working to shake up companies in sectors like shipbuilding. But the question now is how to create fresh growth for the future. Our Hwang Jie sat down with Randall Jones, head of the OECD's Korea-Japan desk, for some insights.
Korean policymakers appear determined to find a way to rescue the country's ailing shipbuilding industry. Do you think the government is taking the right approach?
Well, I think it's inevitable in a market economy that over time, some companies need to be restructured. There's technological change and various trends that mean some companies grow and expand, and some companies shrink and sometimes eventually disappear. So it's very important that restructuring be done based on market principles. Given the size of companies, it's very important that the social welfare system is able to cope with any unemployment or job losses that result.
Some other major export industries like petrochemicals, steel are also suffering from dwindling global demand. Should they also go through major restructuring?
Well, we see a lot of excess capacity in the global economy in these sectors that you mentioned, and partly in China and partly elsewhere. So I think around the world there has to be some restructuring going on because the excess capacity is not viable.
So Korea will have to eventually find new growth engines and will have to reshape the overall corporate landscape. Do you think there is a specific area that Korea should focus on in terms of that issue?
We need to have the service sector become very productive. If you look at labor productivity in the OECD countries as a whole, services are 90% as productive as manufacturing. In Korea, services are 45% as productive as manufacturing. So there's a great scope, a great margin to narrow that gap and make the service sector more productive. And so that could be a second driver of growth to keep Korea growing and improve the quality of life and the level of income.
Is there a specific advice that you would like to give to the Korean government regarding how to foster service industry?
The government tends to focus on key service industries, but the goal should be overall to make a better framework. Regulations in Korea are relatively high compared to other OECD countries. Our indicator of regulation shows that Korea is the fourth highest. And if you look at services versus manufacturing, there's 4 times as many regulations in services as in manufacturing. So what we need is to reduce the regulations that limit productivity in the service sector, reduce entry barriers that make it difficult for new service companies to start up, and we need to improve the financing situation for new startups. Korea is based on a bank-centered finance system, but we need to move more and more towards a investment-based system with investment by business angels, for example, people putting in equity in startups.
All right, thank you so much for your time today, Randall.
All right, it's my pleasure, and I enjoyed it very much.
Oh, Hang Jie asking the questions there. Now, in international news, 3 bombs, a car bomb and 2 suicide bombings rocked Baghdad on Tuesday, killing around 70 people and injuring some 150 others. The Islamic State militant group has claimed responsibility for the attacks, which ripped through markets and restaurants in Shia-dominated neighborhoods. The US and the rest of the international community have condemned the attacks that specifically targeted innocent civilians. The latest bombings come less than a week after ISIS claimed car bombings killed more than 100 people in the Iraqi capital. Shinsegae has become the latest retail giant to join the City duty-free store lineup, showcasing some 600 brands, including numerous high-end designer labels. The new duty-free store is located within Shinsegae department store, nestled in the shopping district of Myeongdong in Seoul. Shinsegae aims to post sales of roughly $1.3 billion this year. The retail giant entered the lucrative duty-free market back in 2012, opening a store in the southern port city of Busan. It currently operates stores in Busan's Gimhae International Airport, as well as the nation's main gateway, Incheon International Airport. With Busan also scheduled to open a duty-free store in Seoul later this week, it's expected to intensify the already heated competition. Sorokdo is an island of stunning natural beauty located in the southwest of Korea. However, the island is better known in Korea for its agonizing past as a leper colony. In the first of a 2-part special, our Moon Gon-young went to the island to see it for herself. Let's take a look.
A 6-hour drive from Seoul off the southwestern coast of the Korean peninsula is an island. At first glance, the island deceptively beautiful. It looks like a wonderful vacation getaway. Deceptive, as this is Sorokdo Island, home to one of the largest leper colonies in the world.
Sorokdo National Hospital is a national research institute that specializes in Hansen's disease. There are currently about 540 former leprosy patients here, some bedridden at the main hospital, others living in one of 7 small villages.
Today, the island is one of a few places in Korea where former lepers receive free housing and medical services. But its history stained with blood and tears. The island's association with leprosy dates back to the Japanese occupation of the Korean peninsula when the authorities set up a leprosarium on Sorokdo in 1916. Standing proofs of the era are the remains of detention rooms and operating theaters where vasectomies and experimental autopsies took place. But even after the end of Japanese colonial rule, the segregation policy remained in place under Korean authorities.
Up until the 1960s, a wired fence stood here dividing the island into 2 parts, lodging for hospital staff and leprosy patients. This is also where the families could come visit once a month to visit the lepers just through the wired fence. They could not touch each other and had to remain at a distance. Hence the name of this site, Sutanjang, or Place of Sadness.
Woo Jong-san was forcefully taken from his hometown and brought to Sorokdo when he was in his 30s.
I was shipped to the island in 1969. A year later, I lost my eyesight. I was so young and I had suddenly turned blind. I didn't want to live anymore. I tried to jump off a cliff and kill myself a couple of times. Back then, life on Sorokdo was very difficult for us inmates. There were horrendous regulations and we did not have freedom.
Human rights abuses continued after the segregation policy was abolished in 1963, and even after that, a social stigma ran deep in and outside of the island. With the establishment of a bridge in 2009, the once most isolated island in the nation is now just a few minutes' drive from mainland. It's a proof in concrete steel of fading, but not completely faded, ancient prejudices. 문건영, Arirang News, Sorokdo.
Well, that's all we have for today. Have a great day. Goodbye.